way of managing demand and supply on the grid. Next slide, please. The way we define virtual power plants at DOE is that they are aggregations of distributed energy resources such as rooftop solar with batteries, EV charging infrastructure, smart electric devices like water heaters or heat pumps with a smart thermostat, or commercial industrial loads that are flexible, shift over time. And those VPPs can provide a variety of different grid services. Next slide. One of the most important services is to smooth peaks in demand. So imagine you have a neighborhood and it's a hot day and everyone gets home, they plug in their EVs, they crank up their air conditioning, and right around dinner, that creates a big spike on the grid. That's represented by the black line on this chart. Now imagine instead that a virtual power plant aggregates certain distributed energy resources, i.e., from customers who have opted into these programs. And some of those homes have been pre-cooled before rush hour so that the AC doesn't have to work as hard in the evening. And some of that EV charging stays until 10, maybe 11 p.m. or midnight. And what that does is it shifts demand outside of those peak hours, brings down the peak demand on the grid so that we don't have to turn on those peaker plants that are disproportionately in low-income communities. It also means that we can delay upgrades to stations or transmission lines that are reaching their capacity during peak hours. Next page. Another example of a virtual power plant would be an aggregation of batteries. Now, I'll show this page without explaining everything to kind of give you a bit of a teaser that in the liftoff report, you can find a variety of different business models and case studies that break down the different services by VPPs and how they are paid either by utilities or through participation in wholesale electricity markets. In this case, this is based on a real battery aggregation operating in where the batteries dispatch on almost a daily basis to charge when solar power is abundant and then dispatch when solar power is scarce to help smooth demand on the grid, but also to make the most of utility scale renewable electricity. Next page. Now, what are the benefits of this approach? Well, they are many. I've already mentioned several. One is resource adequacy. So basically having the generation and distribution infrastructure in place to handle our peak demand. The second is affordability. New peaking capacity from virtual power plants can be up to 60% cheaper than building new capacity in the form of natural gas peaker plants. Third, reliability and resilience. The fact that VPPs help orchestrate and act a diverse portfolio of distributed assets means that they can help bring power back online faster, for example, through distributed batteries or distributed generation, faster in the case of. They also play a big role in decarbonization, right? Don't have to turn on as many peaker plants. We can integrate more renewables. And some VPPs actually contain distributed solar themselves and are a source of generation. They can help relieve strain on transmission and distribution infrastructure, and they can help communities by giving consumers more choice over their source, cost, and convenience of electricity. And the deployment of more distributed energy resources is associated with more clean energy jobs, more energy jobs overall, in fact. And finally, they're highly versatile and flexible and can be adapted to meet the needs of the local grid. You can go on to the next page. So why are we so excited about virtual power plants at this point in time? They actually have been around for decades in the form of demand response, for example. Well, the answer in part is that we are about to experience a tsunami of distributed energy resource adoption. On this page here, we show 3 categories of distributed energy resources. On the left, generation, So that would be rooftop or distributed, say, and fuel-based generators. In the middle, you have water heaters, smart thermostats, and non-residential flexible demand. These are from, this is demand of electricity that is flexible to be shifted. And then on the right-hand side, stationary behind-the-meter batteries. So something like a Tesla Powerwall or a Sonnen battery. And across the board, the height of these bars is not the capacity on the grid growing. It's actually the incremental additions every year. Now, these numbers are big, but if you go to the next page, what's even bigger is the capacity coming online in the form of EV chargers on the left-hand side and EV battery capacity on the right-hand side. Now, I want to be clear. In several cases here, we're showing nameplate capacity, and not every charger is going to be charging a car, right? Because cars are plugged in. And even when they are plugged in, it's not all flexible to be shifted over time, right? Sometimes you need to supercharge your car in the middle of a road trip. That's not, you don't schedule that if you need to get somewhere. But if even a fraction of this capacity is available to be shifted, for example, overnight at someone's home, that represents an enormous amount of capacity that could be orchestrated by a virtual power plant. Now, before we take a look at what that means for VPPs, if you go to the next page, I just want to kind of underscore our starting point. So today we have about 30 to 60 gigawatts of virtual power plants deployed across the US, but they're very concentrated in certain regions. And typically they align with two things. One, where there is the greatest need. So in the dark green states here, where you have more than 10 VPPs procured by utilities, those are also the states that have the highest EV adoption, where load on the grid is growing. And they're also the states where there are favorable regulations for virtual power plants. And that's either at the state level with how utilities are regulated, or in the wholesale markets that operate in the region. But it's really time to move from this patchwork deployment of VPPs to VPP scale. So if you go to the next page, you have to consider that at the same time as peak demand is growing between 2023 and 2030, that's height between the green bars, there is a lot of old generation coming offline and a little bit of old gas generation coming offline. So what that generation retirement demand growth adds up to is that we need about 200 gigawatts of peak demand to be served by new resources added to the grid by 2030. If we can grow virtual power plants from about 30 to 60 gigawatts today to 80 to 160 gigawatts by 2030, we can address 10 to 20% of, and at the same time, we would actually avoid $10 billion per year in grid spending on peaker plants, transmission line, and distribution line upgrades. We put that out and spend that money less quickly and spend the money that we do spend on cleaner resources. The majority of dollars there are going right back to Americans and energy consumers for their participation in virtual power plants. So wanted to paint that picture and underscore that at the Department of Energy, we have over 20 different programs to support the deployment of virtual power plants. And from funding for weatherization of buildings so that they can participate better in, for example, temperature, like a smart thermostat program, for example. It includes working groups on managed EV charging and more. But I want to take a quick moment to mention the programs that we have available in the office where I work, the Loan Programs Office. So under our Title 17 authorities, we can lend to VPP projects and lower the cost of financing for distributed energy resources and the other grid infrastructure that underpins VPPs. So one example project would be last fall, we closed a conditional commitment to Sunnova for up to $3 billion for projects. And what that is it's distributed solar and storage deployments across the United States. And thanks to the low-cost financing that LPO can provide, Sunnova can reach more low and moderate income communities, and that project specifically has a focus on Puerto Rico. So if you want to learn more about the Loan Programs Office, I encourage you to go to our website, and you can also request a consultation for your project. Financing is right for you. Thank you.